The Icebelt Outpost Vanguard Station hung like a metallic spider in the void, its angular hull reflecting the distant light of binary stars. Commander Arya Kwan stood before the observation deck's reinforced viewport, watching automated mining drones carve through asteroids with methodical precision. 6 months had passed since the last skirmish with Dravatian pirates, and the quiet had settled into her bones like the cold of deep space. Another routine patrol report, Commander Lieutenant Simmons, announced from his station, his voice carrying the practiced boredom of a career officer stationed at the galaxy's edge. Sectors 7 through 12 remain clear. No unauthorized vessels, no distress signals, no signs of pirate activity. Arya nodded without turning from the viewport. At 42, she bore the weathered features common to those raised on Earth's Deathworld skin toughened by radiation storms. Eyes that missed nothing, and the unconscious habit of checking escape routes in every room she entered. Her service record read like a catalog of humanity's most brutal campaigns: the Martian Dust Wars, the Europa Ice Rebellion, the pacification of Kepler 442b's predator cities. Each conflict had forged her into something the Galactic Council both feared and needed: a human trained by Earth's lethal environments to survive what would kill most sentient species. The Treaty of Proxima had changed everything 3 years ago. Humanity's expansion had been curtailed, their military presence restricted to designated sectors, like this remote ice belt. The Council's reasoning was simple: a species that evolved on a world where nearly everything tried to kill them made poor neighbors for more civilized races. They were right, of course. Humans had a disturbing tendency to solve problems with violence and to find opportunity in chaos. But they also had something most Council species lacked: the stubborn refusal to abandon those in need, a trait beaten into them by generations of collective survival against impossible odds. "Commander, we're receiving something on the emergency frequencies," Simmons called out, his voice suddenly sharp with attention. "It's not one of ours, and it's not Council standard either." Arya turned from the viewport, her expression shifting to the focused intensity that had kept her alive through a dozen campaigns. "Put it through." The bridge filled with static. Then a voice emerged, alien, desperate, speaking in harmonics that human vocal cords could never produce. The universal translator struggled with the unfamiliar cadence, producing fragments. "Crystal fields dying, acid storms consuming. The Gorma comes, only the Deathworlders." "Can you clean that up?" Arya asked, moving to stand behind Simmons' station. "Working on it, Commander. The signal's badly degraded, but I'm getting better resolution on the linguistic patterns." His fingers danced across the control interface, adjusting frequency filters and running the audio through advanced decryption algorithms. That's much clearer. The voice that emerged was still alien, but now intelligible. "This is Elder Maris of the Orenlet Republic, broadcasting on all frequencies to the Deathworlders of Earth. Our world is under siege by the Gorma Horde. Our crystal cities burn in their acid storms. Our people die by the thousands. The Galactic Council has abandoned us. They say we are not members, not their concern. But we have heard tales of the fierce mercy of Earth's children. Please, if any hear this message, we beg for your aid. The coordinates follow. We know your reputation, and we know the danger we ask you to face. But you are our only hope." The coordinates scrolled across Simmons's screen, marking a system 12 light-years beyond the edge of Council space. Arya studied them, her mind already calculating jump distances and fleet compositions. "Commander," came another voice from across the bridge. Ambassador Yule, the Council's permanent envoy to Vanguard Station, emerged from the diplomatic quarters, with the measured gait of someone accustomed to authority. The Zentaurian's blue-scaled features showed none of the emotional distress that would mark a human face in similar circumstances. "I trust you will be filing this transmission in your routine intelligence reports and taking no further action." "A species is dying out there, Ambassador," Arya replied, her voice carefully neutral. "They've specifically requested our assistance." "A species that is not under Council protection." Yule countered his gill slits, fluttering with what Arya had learned to recognize as irritation. The Treaty of Proxima is quite explicit about human military intervention beyond designated sectors. Any unauthorized action would constitute a violation that could result in the complete isolation of Earth from galactic commerce. Arya felt the familiar weight of command settling on her shoulders. The Treaty of Proxima had been sold to humanity as a compromise limited expansion in exchange for peaceful coexistence with the galaxy's established powers. But she had seen too many battlefields to believe that peace was always the highest virtue. Sometimes, the choice came down to following orders or following conscience. "What do we know about the Gorma Horde?" she asked, directing the question to Lieutenant Simmons. "Pulling up intelligence files now, Commander." Data streams flowed across his monitors. Insectoid raiders' quasi-hive mine structure, known for strip mining operations and aggressive expansion. They're not technically Council enemies because they operate beyond recognized space, but they're considered a significant threat to frontier colonies. Last confirmed sighting was in the Eta Carinae sector, approximately 18 months ago. And they're laying siege to a crystalline world, Arya mused, processing the tactical implications. The Orenlet had mentioned crystal cities, likely a silicon-based life form with technological capabilities. Such species were rare and often possessed unique scientific knowledge. Their loss would be a tragedy for galactic civilization. "Commander Kwan," Ambassador Yule said, stepping closer to her command chair. "I understand your species' compulsion toward what you call heroic intervention. But this matter does not concern the Council or its treaty partners. The Orenlet chose to remain independent. They must face the consequences of that choice. The way Earth faced the consequences of independence during the Plague Years." Arya asked, her voice carrying an edge that made several bridge officers glance up from their stations. "When half our population died, because the Council deemed us too primitive for medical assistance." Yule's scales shifted color slightly, a sign of discomfort. "That was regrettable, but different circumstances entirely. Earth's integration into galactic society was complicated." Arya knew the real story, the one carefully omitted from official histories. Earth had been quarantined not because of primitive technology, but because humanity's survival instincts made them unpredictable allies and dangerous enemies. The Council had hoped that isolation would either destroy human civilization or teach them humility. Instead, it had forged them into something harder, more determined, and ultimately more compassionate than their would-be guardians. "Lieutenant Simmons, what's our current fleet status?" she asked. "Vanguard Station has 3 escort frigates on active duty, Determination Resolute and Indefatigable. All crews are at standard readiness with full weapons loads and recent maintenance cycles completed. We could be ready for FTL jump within 6 hours. And our weapons inventory." Chief Engineer Santos chose that moment to enter the bridge, her coveralls still stained with coolant from the engineering sections. Maria Santos had served with Arya since the Europa campaign, and her expertise with improvised weapon systems had saved them more than once. "We've got the standard armament, plasma cannons, kinetic penetrators, defensive missile systems. But I've been working on something that might interest you, Commander." "Oh," Arya raised an eyebrow. "Those sonic resonance disruptors we developed for asteroid mining. I've been running simulations on their effectiveness against organic targets, particularly insectoid neural networks. The frequency patterns that break up mineral formations should play havoc with hive mind communication systems." Ambassador Yule stepped forward again. "Commander, I must formally protest any discussion of military action beyond Council jurisdiction. Such planning constitutes a clear violation of—" "Ambassador." Arya interrupted her command voice, cutting through his objections like a blade. "You've made your position clear. Now I need you to step back and let me do my job." "Your job is to maintain this station and patrol designated sectors," Yule replied, his voice rising. "Not to launch unauthorized military campaigns against non-Council entities." "My job," Arya said, standing to face him directly, is to protect those who cannot protect themselves. That's what humans do. It's what we've always done, even when it gets us in trouble with our supposed betters. The bridge fell silent except for the quiet hum of life support systems. Arya could see her crew watching the confrontation with expressions that ranged from supportive to worried. They knew, her reputation knew, that she had never backed down from a fight when innocent lives were at stake. They also knew that defying the Council could mean the end of all their careers, possibly worse. Santos, Arya, said without breaking eye contact with the ambassador. How long would it take to modify those disruptors for ship-to-ship combat? 12 hours, maybe 14 if we run into complications with the power couplings. The real challenge will be integrating them with our existing shield systems. The resonance frequencies could interfere with our own defenses if we're not careful. Do it. Simmons, start calculating jump coordinates to the Orenlet system. I want multiple route options, including approaches that keep us clear of Council patrol zones. Commander. Yule's voice carried a note of desperation. I am formally ordering you to stand down. Any action you take beyond Council space will be considered an act of war. Arya finally turned to face him fully, and the ambassador took an involuntary step backward. There was something in her eyes that reminded him why humans were called Deathworlders, why their military reputation made even hardened Council veterans nervous. Ambassador, the Council has made its position clear. The Orenlet are not your concern. That means they're not under Council protection, which means Council jurisdiction doesn't apply. We're going to help them. This will mean sanctions, isolation, possibly military action against Earth itself. Maybe, Arya acknowledged. But at least the Orenlet will be alive to see it. She turned back to her crew. All hands, this is the commander. We've received a distress call from a non-Council species under attack by hostile forces. I'm authorizing preparation for immediate departure. Anyone who wishes to file an objection or request transfer can do so through normal channels, but we launch in 18 hours regardless. The response was immediate and unanimous. Not a single crew member moved toward the transfer request terminals. Instead, they threw themselves into preparation with the focused intensity that marked veteran human military units. Simmons began plotting hyperspace routes. Santos headed for the engineering bay to begin weapon modifications, and the communications officer started broadcasting recall signals for the frigate's skeleton crews. Commander, Lieutenant Simmons, called out after several minutes of intense calculation. I've found something interesting in the navigation data. There are reports of unidentified ships moving through the Kepler 442 system, advanced fighter craft, not matching any known Council designs. Pirates. Negative, ma'am. The signature analysis suggests high-end military hardware, possibly experimental, and they're heading in the general direction of the Orenlet system. Arya frowned. Unknown military vessels in space usually meant complications, and she had enough of those already. Keep monitoring. If someone else is responding to the Orenlet distress call, we need to know who and why. Over the next 18 hours, Vanguard Station transformed from a quiet outpost into a military staging ground. Engineering teams worked around the clock to modify the sonic disruptors, while weapons specialists ran firing calculations and targeting protocols. The 3 escort frigates returned from patrol and immediately began taking on additional supplies and ammunition. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the station's chief medical officer, appeared on the bridge during the final preparation phase. Commander, I've reviewed what little we know about Orenlet physiology. If we're going into a combat zone with potential civilian casualties, I need to know what we're dealing with. What did you find? Silicon-based life forms, as we suspected. Their crystal cities are likely living structures, part of their biology, rather than separate constructions. If the Gorma are using acid weapons, they're essentially dissolving the Orenlet people along with their homes. The implications sent a chill through Arya's spine. This wasn't just an invasion, it was genocide conducted with weapons specifically designed to target the Orenlet's unique biology. Doctor, prepare medical bays for silicon-based casualties. We might be bringing survivors back with us. Already working on it. I've synthesized what medical compounds I can based on theoretical models, but we'll be operating blind if it comes to complex treatment. As launch time approached, Ambassador Yule made one final attempt to dissuade Arya from her course of action. He found her in the observation lounge staring out at the stars that held so many worlds, so many species, so much potential for both wonder and tragedy. "Commander, please reconsider," he said, his voice lacking its earlier authority. "You're risking not just your own career, but the entire relationship between humanity and the Council. Is one unknown species worth that?" Arya didn't turn around. "Ambassador, do you know what the first lesson of survival on Earth is?" "I confess I do not." "That when something bigger and stronger comes to kill something smaller and weaker, you don't stand by and watch. You help even if it means fighting something you can't beat. It's not rational, it's not smart, and it certainly isn't profitable. But it's what makes us human." "The Council will not see it that way." "Then maybe the Council needs to learn what it means to be worth protecting." 18 hours after receiving the Ornlet distress call, 4 human vessels jumped to hyperspace. They left behind a furious Council ambassador, a pile of formal protests, and the growing certainty that their actions would have consequences far beyond the rescue of one crystal world. But as Commander Arya Kwan watched the stars streak past her viewport, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months: the fierce joy of doing what she knew was right, regardless of the cost. The hyperspace journey to the Ornlet system took 14 hours, during which Arya gathered her senior staff to plan their approach. The briefing room aboard Vanguard Station had been reconfigured to accommodate the tactical displays, showing long-range sensor data and intelligence projections about what they might find upon arrival. Best-case scenario. Lieutenant Simmons reported manipulating the holographic display to show various fleet arrangements. "We arrived to find the Gormaw still in the initial siege phase, giving us time to evacuate Ornlet civilians before engaging. Worst case, we drop out of hyperspace into the middle of a feeding frenzy." Chief Engineer Santos leaned forward from her seat. "The sonic disruptors are ready, but I have to stress again, we're operating on theory here. We know the frequencies can disrupt insectoid neural networks in laboratory conditions, but we've never tested them against a fully operational hive mind in combat situations." "What about the integration with our shields?" Arya asked. "That's where it gets tricky. The disruptors generate massive resonance fields that could interfere with our own defensive systems if we're not careful. I've programmed automatic cutoffs to prevent catastrophic feedback, but it means we'll have windows of vulnerability every time we fire." Dr. Vasquez spoke up from her position near the medical displays. "I've been analyzing the transmission from Elder Maris. The linguistic patterns suggest a highly sophisticated society with complex emotional structures. These aren't primitive beings. They're likely on par with Council-level civilizations in terms of intellectual development. Which makes their extermination even more tragic," Arya observed grimly. "Any word on those unidentified ships Simmons detected?" "Negative, Commander. They disappeared from sensors after entering the Kepler 442 system. Could be maintaining communication silence, or they might have jumped to an entirely different destination." The tactical assessment continued for another hour, with each department head contributing their expertise to the developing battle plan. The approach would be cautious, but direct emerge from hyperspace at the edge of the Ornlet system, assess the situation, and respond accordingly. If the Gormaw were still in siege mode, the human fleet would attempt to establish contact with Ornlet survivors while engaging the raiders. If the situation had already collapsed into full-scale slaughter, they would focus on rescue operations while doing whatever damage they could to the Gormaw forces. "Remember," Arya concluded, as the briefing ended, "our primary mission is humanitarian. We're here to save lives, not to win glory or prove points. But if the Gormaw want to fight, we'll give them one they won't forget." The transition from hyperspace to normal space was always a moment of vulnerability, and Arya felt her muscles tense as the stars stopped streaking and resolved into points of light. The first thing she noticed was the absence of the usual chatter from her sensor operators. Instead, There was only stunned silence. "Report," she ordered. "Commander," Simmons' voice was tight with shock. "You need to see this." The main display flickered to life, showing the Orenlet system in devastating detail. What should have been a beautiful arrangement of crystal worlds orbiting a golden star was instead a scene of systematic destruction. The largest planet, presumably, the Orenlet homeworld, was partially shrouded in dark clouds that pulsed with unnatural colors. Orbital installations that had once gleamed like jewelry were now twisted wreckage falling toward the planet's surface. But it was the ships that truly commanded attention. Hundreds of Gorma vessels swarmed through the system like metallic insects, their organic-looking hulls reflecting the star's light in patterns that hurt to look at directly. They moved with the coordinated precision of a hive mind working together to strip mine entire moons, while simultaneously bombarding population centers on the crystal world below. "How many?" Arya asked. Initial count shows approximately 300 Gorma vessels of various classes. Simmons reported, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what they faced. "Mostly light raiders and medium transports, but I'm reading at least 12 heavy warships and what appears to be a command vessel of unknown configuration. And Orenlet survivors. I'm detecting scattered transmissions from the planet's surface, but they're heavily degraded by atmospheric interference. Best guess is that significant populations are still alive in underground shelters or hardened surface installations." Arya absorbed this information while calculating odds and options. 4 human ships against 300 Gorma raiders was suicidal by any rational standard. But rational thinking had never been humanity's strong suit, especially when innocent lives were at stake. "Santos, how quickly can we deploy the sonic disruptors?" "Weapons are online and ready, Commander. But remember, we'll need to get close enough for effective targeting, which means moving into their defensive perimeter." "Do it. All ships advance to engagement range. Target the nearest raider squadron and prepare to demonstrate why humans are called Deathworlders." The human fleet began its approach, 4 ships against an armada, their crews driven by the same stubborn courage that had carried their species through ice ages, plagues, and the hostile depths of space. They had come too far to turn back now. That's when the new contacts appeared on the sensors. "Commander," Simmons called out with excitement. "Multiple ships dropping out of hyperspace bearing 27 Mark IV. Configuration unknown, but they're broadcasting on human emergency frequencies." The display updated to show a formation of sleek, angular vessels, unlike anything in Council or human design. Their hulls seemed to shift color as they moved, adapting to the local light conditions, like sophisticated camouflage systems. "This is Squadron Leader Varix of the Vera Coalition," came a transmission in accented but clear human standard. "We received the Orenlet distress call and have come to assist. Deathworlder fleet, please respond." Arya felt a surge of hope mixed with confusion. She had never heard of the Vera Coalition, but any ally in the face of such overwhelming odds was welcome. "Squadron Leader Varix, this is Commander Quan of the human fleet. We're preparing to engage the Gorma forces. What are your capabilities?" Fast attack craft with plasma weaponry and advanced shielding," came the reply. "We can provide escort and screening while your larger vessels engage their capital ships. But Commander, you should know we are not authorized by the Council for this action. Like you, we act from conscience rather than politics." The tactical situation suddenly became much more interesting. The Vera Coalition ships, there were 30 of them, were clearly advanced vessels, operated by beings who shared humanity's willingness to help those in need, despite political consequences. "Squadron Leader, we're deploying experimental sonic weapons that may affect insectoid neural networks. Recommend you maintain distance until we can assess their effectiveness." "Understood, Commander. Vara fighters moving to flanking positions. We'll draw off their screening forces while you attack their command structure." The battle for the Orenlet system began with a coordinated assault that caught the Gorma completely off guard. The human sonic disruptors fired in synchronized pulses, sending invisible waves of destruction through the raider formations. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Entire squadrons of Gorma ships suddenly lost coordination, their movements becoming erratic and uncontrolled as the hive mind connection was severed. The Vara fighters swept through the confusion like wolves among sheep, their plasma weapons carving through Gorma hulls with surgical precision. The aliens had clearly studied human tactics, adapting Earth's hit-and-run strategies to their own advanced technology. But the Gorma were not defenseless. As the initial shock wore off, the surviving ships began to adapt, their hive mind learning to compensate for the sonic interference. Acid weapons designed for mining operations were turned against the human ships, eating through hull armor with frightening efficiency. "Determination is taking heavy damage," reported the communications officer. "Hull breaches on decks 3 and 7. Resolute requesting assistance," came another transmission. "We're surrounded by light raiders and running low on defensive missiles." Arya watched the tactical display with growing concern. The sonic disruptors were effective, but they weren't invincible weapons. The Gorma were adapting faster than anticipated, and the human fleet was outnumbered by odds that even their advanced technology couldn't overcome indefinitely. That's when she made the decision that would define not only the battle, but the future relationship between humanity and the galaxy beyond Council space. "All ships form up on Vanguard Station. We're going after their command vessel." "Commander." Santos's voice came through the intercom from engineering. "The disruptors are showing signs of overload. If we push them to full power, we risk losing our shields entirely." "How long can we maintain maximum output?" "Maybe 10 minutes 15 at the outside. After that, we'll be defenseless against return fire. Then we'd better make those 10 minutes count. Set course for the Gorma command ship. All weapons to maximum power." The human fleet's desperate charge through the heart of the Gorma Armada would be remembered as one of the most audacious military actions in galactic history. 4 ships, supported by 30 Vara fighters, drove straight into the center of a formation designed to withstand assault by entire Council battle fleets. The Gorma command vessel was a nightmare of organic architecture and mechanical augmentation, a living ship the size of a small moon that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. It was from this vessel that the hive mind coordinated its forces, and its destruction would leave the entire Gorma fleet blind and leaderless. "Boarding parties prepare for deployment," Arya ordered as Vanguard Station closed to assault range. "We're going inside that thing." The human boarding action was led by Arya herself, along with 24 of her most experienced combat veterans. They launched in armored shuttles that punched through the command vessel's organic hull, like bullets through flesh, their cutting beams carving temporary entry points before the ship's healing mechanisms could seal the breaches. Inside the Gorma command vessel, Arya found herself in a living nightmare. The corridors were organic tubes that pulsed with their own heartbeat, lit by bioluminescent nodes that tracked the intruder's movements. The air was thick with chemical signals that would have driven most species to madness, but human adaptation to hostile environments allowed them to function despite the alien atmosphere. The Gorma defenders were creatures half machine and half insect, with chitinous armor and mechanical implants that extended their natural weapons into tools of war. They fought with the coordinated fury of a hive mind, but they had never faced opponents who could match their ferocity while maintaining individual tactical thinking. "Stay together!" Arya shouted as her team advanced through the twisting passages. "Watch for ambush points and keep moving toward the neural center." The battle inside the command vessel was close-quarters combat at its most brutal. Human weapons designed for ship-to-ship combat were modified on the fly for corridor fighting, while Gorma acid spitters filled the air with caustic death. Arya's team took casualties, but they pressed forward with the relentless determination that had carried humanity through every crisis in their violent history. Finally, they reached the neural center, a vast chamber filled with pulsing organic machinery that served as the brain of the Gorma fleet. Elder creatures that were more machine than insect tended to massive neural networks, their thoughts controlling hundreds of ships across the star system. "Santos, can you overload this thing?" Arya asked, keeping her weapon trained on the nearest Gorma controller. I can try, but the power feedback could collapse the entire ship. We'd have maybe 2 minutes to get out. Do it. The chief engineer began working with the frantic efficiency of someone who knew that failure meant death for herself and everyone depending on her. The Gorma neural network was unlike anything in human technology, but the basic principles of energy management were universal. Got it, Santos announced. Cascade overload in 90 seconds. We need to go now. The retreat from the Gorma command vessel was a running battle through collapsing corridors and disintegrating systems. The neural network's death throes sent waves of chaotic signals through the ship's organic structure, causing entire sections to dissolve or transform into hostile configurations. Arya's team made it to their shuttles with seconds to spare launching, just as the command vessel began its final transformation into an expanding cloud of organic debris. The explosion was visible across the entire star system, a flash of bioluminescent death that marked the end of the Gorma fleet's coordination. Without their hive mind guidance, the surviving Gorma ships fell into confused disorder. Some fled toward the edge of the system, others began attacking each other, and many simply shut down their engines and drifted helplessly in space. The Battle of Orenlet was over, but the consequences were just beginning. The immediate aftermath of the battle saw a frantic effort to locate and assist Orenlet survivors. The crystal world's surface was scarred by acid bombardment, with entire cities dissolved into slag, but significant populations had survived in underground shelters carved from the planet's crystalline bedrock. Commander, we're receiving multiple transmissions from the surface. Lieutenant Simmons reported as Vanguard Station established orbit around the wounded world. The Orenlet survivors are requesting permission to come aboard for medical assistance. Granted. Dr. Vasquez, are you ready for silicon-based casualties? As ready as I can be with no previous experience and improvised medical protocols, the doctor replied. But we'll do what we can. The first Orenlet refugees to board Vanguard Station were a revelation. They were tall, graceful beings whose skin contained actual crystal matrices that refracted light in beautiful patterns. Their cities hadn't just been built from crystal, they had been grown shaped by biological processes that merged living tissue with mineral structures. Elder Maris, the Orenlet, who had sent the original distress call, was among the first to be evacuated. Despite the trauma of watching her world burn, she retained the dignified bearing of a natural diplomat. Commander Kwan, she said through the universal translator, her voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. We owe you a debt that can never be repaid. When the Council abandoned us, when even our closest neighbors turned away in fear, you came. The Deathworlders of Earth proved that strength and compassion are not mutually exclusive. We did what anyone should have done, Arya replied, though she knew that wasn't entirely true. The human willingness to fight hopeless battles for strangers was unusual, even by galactic standards. Perhaps, but you were the only ones who actually did it. The rescue operations continued for 6 hours with human and Vera coalition shuttles working together to evacuate survivors from the shattered crystal cities. Dr. Vasquez and her medical team improvised treatments for injuries that no human had ever seen before, while engineering crews began assessments of what could be salvaged from the Orenlet infrastructure. It was during these operations that the Council fleet arrived. Multiple contacts dropping out of hyperspace, Simmons announced with notable tension in his voice. Council configuration looks like a full diplomatic escort with military support. Arya felt her stomach tighten. She had known this moment would come, but that didn't make it any easier to face. How many ships? 12 vessels, including what appears to be a tribunal-class command ship. They're broadcasting on all frequencies, demanding immediate communication with the ranking human officer. Put them through. The main display flickered to show the bridge of a Council command vessel, dominated by the imposing figure of High Arbiter Kelos, one of the most senior officials in the galactic government. The Zentorian's scales were the deep blue of extreme age, and her eyes held the cold weight of authority exercised across centuries. Commander Kwan, She began without preamble. You stand in violation of the Treaty of Proxima, Section 7, Subsection 12, unauthorized military intervention beyond Council jurisdiction. You will surrender your vessels immediately and submit to tribunal investigation. High Arbiter, we responded to a distress call from a species under attack. Arya replied, keeping her voice steady despite the circumstances. The Orenlet specifically requested assistance from Earth, and they were outside Council protection. The Orenlet's status is irrelevant. Your actions constitute a clear breach of treaty obligations. Furthermore, your alliance with the unauthorized Vera Coalition vessels represents a separate violation of interspecies military cooperation protocols. Squadron Leader Varix's voice cut through the communication channel from his nearby fighter. High Arbiter, the Vera Coalition takes full responsibility for our actions here. We acted independently without human authorization or coordination. Your status will be addressed separately, Kelos replied coldly. Commander Quan, you have 30 minutes to transfer command of your vessels to Council authority and prepare for extradition to stand trial. Arya looked around her bridge, seeing the faces of crew members who had followed her into impossible odds because they believed in doing what was right. They had saved thousands of lives and prevented the extinction of an entire species. The idea of surrendering to bureaucrats who had stood by while genocide unfolded filled her with a rage that took considerable effort to control. High Arbiter, with respect, I decline. The silence that followed was so complete that Arya could hear the ambient hum of life support systems. Commander, you cannot be serious. Defiance of a direct Council order carries penalties up to and including complete isolation of Earth from galactic civilization. Then, maybe Earth needs to reconsider whether galactic civilization is worth being part of. Before Kelos could respond, another voice joined the communication, Elder Maris, speaking from the medical bay, where she was receiving treatment for acid burns. High Arbiter Kelos, I formally request to address the tribunal regarding these proceedings. The Orenlet have no standing in Council jurisdiction, Kelos replied dismissively. Perhaps not, but we have standing in the Court of Moral Authority. Maris responded with surprising steel in her voice. The beings you seek to punish came to our aid when you would not. They risked their lives and their careers to prevent genocide, while the Council debated protocol. If this is how the galaxy's civilized races treat those who show compassion, then perhaps it is time for a new understanding of what civilization means. The communication channel erupted with overlapping voices as Council representatives tried to regain control of the narrative. But Maris had opened a door that could not be easily closed, and Arya realized that the implications of their actions were spreading far beyond the Orenlet system. Squadron Leader Varix spoke up again. High Arbiter, the Vera Coalition has been monitoring Council policies regarding frontier species for some time. We have documented 17 separate instances in the past 5 years where Council inaction led to unnecessary suffering and death among non-member populations. Perhaps it is time for a formal review of these policies. The Vera Coalition has no authority to review Council policies, Kelos snapped, but her voice carried less certainty than before. Actually, came a new voice from a different transmission source. They do. The display split to show another Council official, Councillor Theron, a progressive Andromedan who had long advocated for reform of frontier policies. Her presence in the Orenlet system suggested that Arya's actions had triggered political movements that were already in motion. Councillor Theron, Kelos said with obvious displeasure, your presence here is highly irregular. As was the abandonment of the Orenlet to genocide, Theron replied smoothly. High Arbiter, I am here representing a significant minority faction within the Council that believes our current policies regarding frontier species require immediate review. The actions of Commander Quan and the Vara Coalition, while technically unauthorized, have prevented a humanitarian catastrophe that the Council was unwilling to address. The political implications were becoming clear. Arya's decision to defy the Council had not occurred in a vacuum. It had provided a catalyst for existing tensions about how the galactic government handled crisis situations beyond its direct authority. Furthermore, Theron continued, the successful cooperation between human and Vera coalition forces suggests that alternatives to current defense arrangements should be explored. I am formally requesting a full tribunal review of frontier protection policies, with all relevant parties given opportunity to present evidence and testimony. High Arbiter Kellos was clearly struggling to maintain control of a situation that was rapidly spiraling beyond her authority. The simple matter of punishing treaty violators had become a galaxy-wide debate about the nature of moral responsibility and the limits of governmental power. Very well, she said finally. A formal tribunal will be convened to address these matters. But until that tribunal reaches its conclusions, all parties will respect existing treaty obligations and jurisdictional boundaries. With respect, High Arbiter, Arya interjected, the Orenlet survivors need immediate assistance with resettlement and reconstruction. Are you ordering us to abandon them again? The question hung in the space between ships, like a live mine. To order the humans to abandon the Orenlet would be to confirm every criticism of Council indifference. To allow them to continue would be to tacitly approve their treaty violations. Elder Maris chose that moment to speak again. High Arbiter, the Orenlet Republic formally requests emergency humanitarian status under Council Provision 47 Alpha. We understand this requires a sponsor from among the established member species. The Human Colonial Authority volunteers to serve as sponsor, Arya said, immediately knowing she was exceeding her authority, but trusting that Earth's government would support her decision retroactively. Counselor Theron smiled an expression that looked genuinely pleased on her alien features. The Andromedan Republic seconds the sponsorship request. Motion carries under emergency provisions. The legal maneuvering was elegant in its simplicity. By claiming emergency humanitarian status, the Orenlet could receive Council protection and assistance. By sponsoring them, humanity gained the right to provide that assistance. The treaty violations were temporarily set aside in favor of life-saving action. High Arbiter Kellos realized she had been outmaneuvered by beings who understood that sometimes rules mattered less than results. Very well. Humanitarian operations may continue pending tribunal review, but this matter is far from resolved. As the Council fleet withdrew to establish a formal observation presence, Arya found herself in the strange position of being simultaneously a treaty violator and a recognized humanitarian operative. The contradictions would need to be sorted out eventually, but for now, there were lives to save and a civilization to rebuild. The reconstruction of Orenlet society began immediately with human engineering crews working alongside Vera Coalition specialists to assess what could be salvaged from the crystal cities. The technology was unlike anything either species had encountered, living crystal matrices that could be guided to grow into predetermined shapes, creating structures that were simultaneously biological and mineral. This is extraordinary, Chief Engineer Santos reported during a planning session held in one of Vanguard Station's conference rooms. The Orenlet don't build their cities so much as cultivate them. With the right knowledge and resources, they could regrow everything they lost, but it will take time and careful nurturing. Elder Maris, who had insisted on participating despite her injuries, provided context for the technical discussions. Our crystal gardens were cultivated over millennia, each structure grown to harmonize with its environment and purpose. The Gormaz acid attacks didn't just destroy buildings, they poisoned the very substrate from which new growth must emerge. What about starting fresh, suggested Squadron Leader Varix, who had been invited to join the planning sessions despite his unofficial status. The Vera Coalition has experience with terraforming technologies. We could help establish new growth sites on uncontaminated portions of your world. Or we could offer resettlement opportunities on human-administered worlds, Arya added. Earth's colonial territories include several planets with geological characteristics that might support crystal cultivation. Maris considered these options, with the careful deliberation of someone responsible for an entire species' survival. Both possibilities have merit, but our connection to this world runs deeper than mere convenience. The crystal matrices here contain the accumulated memories and knowledge of our civilization. To abandon them would be to lose part of ourselves. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent communication from Lieutenant Simmons on the bridge. "Commander, we're receiving a priority transmission from Earth Command. Admiral Morrison wants to speak with you immediately." Arya excused herself from the planning session and made her way to the bridge, wondering what reaction her unauthorized mission had provoked from Earth's military leadership. Admiral Morrison was known as a pragmatist who valued results over protocol, but even he had limits to how much independence he could tolerate from field commanders. "Admiral," she said as the communication link established, "I assume you've heard about our situation here." Morrison's weathered face appeared on the display, showing the kind of exhaustion that came from dealing with political crisis at the highest levels. "Commander, in the past 48 hours, I've fielded calls from the Colonial Authority, the Earth Defense Council, 3 separate council ambassadors, and 2 news organizations wanting to know if humanity is preparing for war with the galactic government. What exactly did you do out there?" "We saved a species from extinction, sir." "And violated half a dozen treaty provisions in the process, not to mention forming unauthorized alliances with unknown military forces." "The Vara Coalition proved to be reliable allies, Admiral. Their technology is advanced, their tactical coordination is excellent, and they share our commitment to protecting innocent lives." Morrison rubbed his temples in a gesture Arya recognized as his standard response to particularly complicated situations. "Quan, I've been reviewing the intelligence reports on your operation. What you accomplished out there was tactically brilliant and strategically necessary. The Council's abandonment of the Orenlet was a disgrace to everything they claim to represent. But you've started a political firestorm that's spreading across the entire galaxy. Half the Council wants to declare humanity a rogue state and impose complete economic sanctions. The other half is calling for fundamental reforms to frontier policy. And now, we're getting reports of similar humanitarian crises in at least 6 other systems, all involving species that the Council considers outside jurisdiction." The implications were staggering. Arya had acted to save one world, but her actions had apparently catalyzed a galaxy-wide reassessment of how civilized species responded to distant suffering. "What are Earth's orders, sir?" "Officially, continue humanitarian operations while avoiding further treaty violations. Unofficially, document everything. If the Council wants to turn this into a formal review of frontier policies, we're going to make sure they have all the facts about what their inaction has cost." "And the Vara Coalition?" "Intelligence is working on that. Initial analysis suggests they're a confederation of species that have had similar experiences with Council indifference. Think of them as the galaxy's equivalent of a humanitarian aid organization, but with military capabilities." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, covering logistical support, political ramifications, and contingency plans for various possible outcomes. By the time it concluded, Arya had a clearer picture of the larger forces that had been set in motion by her decision to answer the Orenlet distress call. Returning to the planning session, she found that the technical discussions had evolved into something approaching a formal reconstruction treaty between the Orenlet humanity and the Vara Coalition. Elder Maris was outlining the cultural and spiritual requirements for crystal cultivation, while Santos and Varix compared notes on the most efficient methods for environmental rehabilitation. Commander Maris said as Arya rejoined the group, "We have been discussing the possibility of formalizing our cooperation beyond the immediate crisis. The Orenlet Republic would like to propose a permanent alliance with Earth and the Vara Coalition for mutual defense and humanitarian assistance." "That's an interesting idea," Arya replied carefully, "but it would need approval from higher authorities than me." "Of course. But we wanted you to know that what began here as a rescue mission has grown into something larger. We see the potential for a new kind of galactic organization, one based on moral responsibility, rather than political convenience. Squadron Leader Varix leaned forward in his chair. The Vera Coalition has been pursuing similar goals for some time. Our membership includes 17 species that have experienced council abandonment or indifference during crisis situations. We would welcome both humanity and the Orenlet as partners in developing alternative approaches to interstellar cooperation. Arya realized she was witnessing the birth of something unprecedented in galactic politics, a formal alliance based not on territorial or economic interests, but on shared commitment to humanitarian principles. The bureaucrats and diplomats would undoubtedly spend years working out the details, but the fundamental framework was taking shape in a conference room aboard a human outpost in the depths of space. "I'll need to pass these proposals up the chain of command," she said, "but I can tell you that Earth has always been interested in partnerships with species that share our values." The planning session continued late into the station's night cycle, with participants from 3 different species, working to forge a new model for galactic civilization. Outside the conference room, Windows the wounded Orenlet world turned slowly against the starfield, its crystal cities beginning to gleam again as emergency repairs restored power to key infrastructure. It would take months, possibly years, to fully restore what the Gorma had destroyed. But something new was growing from the ruins, not just rebuilt cities, but rebuilt hope for what galactic society could become when compassion overcame bureaucracy. The formal tribunal convened 3 weeks later in the council chambers on Centauri Prime, the galactic government's administrative capital. The proceedings were broadcast across the galaxy, marking the first time that humanitarian policy had received such widespread public attention. Commander Arya Kwan found herself in the unusual position of being simultaneously defendant and expert witness called upon to explain both her actions and their necessity. The council's prosecutor, a stern Rigelian named Karas, painted her as a dangerous rogue who had violated fundamental principles of interstellar law. The defendant's actions, Karas argued before the assembled tribunal, represent a clear threat to the stability of interstellar relations. If individual commanders are permitted to unilaterally decide which laws to follow based on personal moral assessments, the entire framework of galactic governance becomes meaningless. But Councillor Theron, now formally representing the Reform faction within the Council, had prepared a devastating counter-argument. Prosecutor Karas speaks of stability and law, but what of justice? What of the moral obligation that comes with power? The Council knew of the Orenlet situation for weeks before Commander Kwan received their distress call. "We chose to do nothing because they were not members of our organization." Elder Maris, testifying as a witness for the defense, provided the most compelling testimony of the proceedings. "Honored members of the tribunal," she said, her crystalline voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic systems, "I ask you to consider what message your actions will send to species throughout the galaxy. If you punish those who showed us mercy, while excusing those who abandoned us to genocide, what hope remains for any being who finds themselves beyond the protection of your laws?" The Vera Coalition presented evidence of 17 separate cases, where council inaction had led to preventable tragedies. Squadron Leader Varix, testifying via secured communication from his ship, outlined a pattern of bureaucratic paralysis that had cost millions of lives over the past decade. The current system, he argued, creates a moral hazard where member species can ignore crises that don't directly affect their interests, knowing that intervention requires unanimous consent that is rarely achieved in time to matter. But it was the surprise testimony of Admiral Morrison, representing Earth's military leadership, that provided the most significant revelation of the proceedings. Honored Tribunal. Morrison said, his weathered face showing none of the diplomatic deference that usually characterized human interactions with the Council. "I want to make Earth's position absolutely clear. Commander Kwan acted within the scope of her authority, as defined by human military regulations regarding humanitarian intervention. If the Council chooses to punish her for saving innocent lives, humanity will withdraw from all treaty obligations and pursue independent foreign policy objectives. The threat was politely phrased, but unmistakable punish Arya, and Earth would leave the Council entirely. Given humanity's reputation as effective fighters and their growing influence in frontier regions, this would be a significant loss for galactic stability. High Arbiter Kelos, presiding over the tribunal, found herself navigating between competing political pressures that threatened to tear apart the fundamental structures of galactic governance. The conservative faction demanded strict enforcement of existing treaties, while the reform faction pushed for fundamental changes to humanitarian policy. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Dr. Vasquez testifying about the medical challenges of treating Orenlit casualties. Her clinical description of silicon-based injuries caused by Gorma acid weapons painted a picture of suffering that transcended species boundaries. "The beings I treated," she said quietly, "experienced pain and fear, just like any human would. Their biochemistry was different, their anatomy was unique, but their capacity for suffering was universal. When someone is dying, questions of jurisdiction become irrelevant. You help because you can, because you must, because failing to act would diminish something essential about what it means to be a thinking, feeling being." The tribunal deliberated for 6 hours before reaching its verdict. High Arbiter Kelos announced the decision in a voice that carried both authority and uncertainty. After careful consideration of all evidence and testimony, this tribunal finds that while Commander Kwan's actions constituted technical violations of existing treaty provisions, they were undertaken in response to extraordinary humanitarian circumstances that existing protocols failed to address adequately. She paused, clearly, struggling with the political implications of her next words. Furthermore, the tribunal recognizes that the current framework for humanitarian intervention contains significant gaps that have contributed to preventable suffering among non-member species. Therefore, we are implementing the following reforms effective immediately. The reforms were sweeping in their scope. Emergency humanitarian status could now be granted by any 2 council members, rather than requiring unanimous consent. Member species were authorized to provide assistance to non-member populations under threat with formal review, occurring after, rather than before, intervention. Most significantly, the Vara Coalition was granted provisional member status, recognizing their role as a humanitarian organization with legitimate interests in galactic affairs. Finally, Kelos continued, the tribunal recommends the establishment of a permanent humanitarian response force, jointly administered by the Council and volunteer member species, with authorization to respond to crisis situations regardless of the threatened population's political status. Commander Arya Kwan was formally censured for treaty violations, but received no punishment with the tribunal, noting that her actions had demonstrated courage and compassion that reflect the highest ideals of galactic civilization. The political ramifications of the tribunal's decision rippled across the galaxy for months afterward. Conservative council members complained that the reforms had effectively legalized vigilante justice, while reform advocates argued that the changes didn't go far enough in addressing systemic problems with frontier policy. But for the species directly affected by the new policies, the changes represented hope for a galaxy where moral responsibility could override political convenience. The reconstruction of Orenlit society proceeded ahead of schedule, aided by an unprecedented cooperation between human engineers, Vara Coalition specialists, and Orenlit cultivators. The crystal cities that emerged from the ruins were more beautiful than their predecessors, incorporating design elements that honored both tradition and the new partnerships that had made their rebuilding possible. Elder Maris stood in the central plaza of New Harmony, the first fully restored crystal city, watching as bioluminescent patterns flowed through the living walls around her. The memorial that dominated the plaza's center was a work of collaborative art, Orenlet, crystal cultivation, human metallurgy, and Vara energy manipulation combined to create a sculpture that captured light and transformed it into something approaching music. The memorial's central inscription was simple. When darkness shattered the crystal world, the Deathworlders answered, and the galaxy's fiercest protectors were reborn. Commander Arya Kwan, now serving as Earth's liaison to the newly formed Humanitarian Response Force, stood beside the Orin-led Elder as the dedication ceremony concluded. Around them, representatives from dozens of species mingled in conversation, many of them frontier populations that had never before had representation in galactic affairs. "It's not what I expected when I answered your distress call," Arya admitted, watching human children play alongside young Orinlet in the plaza's crystal gardens. "Nor what we expected when we sent it," Meras replied. "We asked for rescue and received transformation instead." Squadron leader Varix approached from across the plaza. His adaptive armor shifted to ceremonial colors that complemented the crystal structures around them. "The Humanitarian Response Force has received 47 requests for assistance in the past month alone," he reported. "Apparently word has spread that someone in the galaxy is finally willing to act when action is needed." "Any regrets?" Arya asked, thinking of the political battles still raging in council chambers across the galaxy. "None," Varix replied immediately. "The Vara Coalition has spent too long operating in the shadows, helping where we could, while legitimate authorities debated protocol. It's time for compassion to have an official voice in galactic affairs." Meras gestured toward the memorial sculpture, where children from 3 different species were taking turns making the crystals sing with their touch. "Look at them. They don't see aliens or strangers. They see friends they haven't met yet. Perhaps that's the real victory here." As the ceremony wound down, and representatives began departing for their various worlds, Arya found herself thinking about the chain of events that had led from a desperate distress call to fundamental changes in how the galaxy approached humanitarian crises. It had started with a simple choice: help those who needed help regardless of political consequences. The irony wasn't lost on her that humanity, once considered too dangerous for galactic society, had become the catalyst for making that society more compassionate. Earth's violent history had taught its children that strength without mercy was meaningless, that true civilization was measured not by its laws, but by its willingness to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. The Humanitarian Response Force would face challenges in the years to come: budget constraints, political opposition, and the simple logistical difficulty of coordinating rescue operations across galactic distances. But it would also have something that previous humanitarian efforts had lacked: the backing of species that understood what it meant to survive impossible odds, and the determination to ensure that others would have the same chance. As Arya prepared to return to Vanguard Station for her next assignment, she received one final communication from Admiral Morrison. "Kwan, I thought you'd want to know the Council just approved funding for 12 new humanitarian response bases in frontier sectors. Apparently, saving the galaxy's conscience was good for Earth's reputation." "Any word on staffing assignments, sir?" "You're being offered command of the entire frontier sector program. Interested?" Arya looked out at the crystal city rising around her at the memorial that honored those who chose courage over comfort, at the children playing games that hadn't existed before 3 species learned to trust each other. "Yes, sir. I'm very interested." The communication ended, and Arya walked through the crystal gardens one final time before departing. In the distance, construction sites marked where new cities would rise, built with technologies that combined the best innovations of multiple species, working toward common goals. The galaxy was changing one rescued world at a time. And somewhere in the depths of space, another distress call was waiting for someone willing to answer it, regardless of the political cost. When that call came, the Humanitarian Response Force would be ready. Because in a galaxy full of civilized species that had forgotten what civilization truly meant, someone had to remember that the measure of a society was not its power, but its compassion. And if that someone happened to be the descendants of a world so hostile that it had forged its children into Deathworlders, perhaps that was exactly what the galaxy needed.